welcome to the Literature Café. Today we are going to dive into one of Friedrich Nietzsche's most famous and yet also most frequently misunderstood passages, namely the well-known statement, God is dead. So Nietzsche clearly sets himself apart from these systematic philosophers like Kant because he has this richness of interpretation, which is also why the real difficulty with Nietzsche usually isn't about understanding him per se. Instead, the bigger challenge is that we often think we've understood him far too quickly after reading just a few sentences, or sometimes even without reading anything at all.
I'm too smart to read.
And that's why it's all the more important, especially with controversial topics like these, to approach a text just calmly without all this hysteria and carefully explore what Nietzsche truly wants to communicate. And alright, let's jump straight into it. God is dead, the madman. And this famous statement actually originates from Nietzsche's aphorism 125, titled The Madman, and is found in his 1882 work, The Choice Science. And this passage begins as followed. Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning light, went to the marketplace and shouted incessantly, I seek God! I seek God! As there were many people standing together who did not believe in God, he caused much amusement. Is he lost? Asked one. Did he wander off like a child? Asked another. Or is he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Has he gone to the sea? Has he emigrated? And in this manner they shouted and laughed. So what is actually going on here? In this aphorism, Nietzsche introduces us to a madman, so someone perceived by those around him as crazy, irrational, or simply insane. And there are several reasons for this. The most obvious reason is that this man lights a lantern in broad daylight. And at first glance, this seems absurd and completely pointless. After all, when the sun is already shining brightly and everything is visible, why would you need additional light? What is left to illuminate? But Nietzsche uses this actually as a symbol, and to better grasp this we need to consider the historical context, because Nietzsche writes at the end of the 19th century, at a time when religious faith had already been seriously challenged. And many people today think Nietzsche's phrase, God is dead, is outdated because most no longer seriously believe in God anyway. They interpret it merely as stating that belief has disappeared and atheism is following. So Nietzsche as a herald of atheism, but that's precisely what he is not, because the people the madman encounters already live in a post-enlightenment society, dominated by reason and scientific positivism. Belief in God was no longer self-evident for many at that time already. And also interesting is the setting of the scene, which was a marketplace. And during Nietzsche's era, the marketplace was the central public space for social exchange, discussion, gossip, all the conversations, perhaps comparable today to social media, where people might respond with self-help advice and memes. So precisely in this setting, the madman meets a crowd that not only no longer believes in God, but is completely assured of their enlightened attitude. These people feel they have left all dogmas behind, committing themselves solely to reason and genuine knowledge, not religious ideas or ideologies. Instead, they feel enlightened, rational, and scientifically orientated. Yet exactly here lies a fundamental misunderstanding Nietzsche aims to highlight, because the madman seeks to demonstrate to these supposedly enlightened atheists, you are mistaken, not necessarily regarding God's existence or non-existence, but rather in your assumption of having a clear, stable self-understanding, which in reality you do not. And the lantern symbolizes light, so the light of knowledge. And by lighting the lantern, the madman symbolically demonstrate that the crowd is completely unaware of the profound intellectual darkness in which they actually exist. And the light of enlightenment isn't sufficient to grasp the deeper meaning and implications of the statement God is dead. And initially, the madman indeed appears completely insane to the crowd, as someone hasn't understood what everyone else already knows, namely that God has become irrelevant. Therefore, they mock and at him with questions like, has God gotten lost? Has he wandered away like a child? Or is he hiding? And these questions indicate that the crowd treats the idea of God trivially and laughably, as thought God were simply a missing person. We have killed him. And the text continues as follows. Then the madman leaped into their midst and looked at them with piercing eyes and cried, "Where did God go?" "I will tell you. We have killed him, you and I. We are all his murderers. But how did we do this? How were we able to drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the whole horizon? What did we do when we unchained this earth from its sun? Where is it heading? Where are we heading? Away from all suns. Are we not constantly falling backwards, sideways, forwards, in all directions? Is there still an above and below? Are we not straying as through an infinite nothingness? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is night not falling evermore? Mustn't lanterns be lit in the morning? Do we hear nothing yet of the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Do we smell nothing yet of the divine putrefaction? For even gods putrefy. God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. And at this point, Nietzsche's text takes a dramatic turn. The man who initially seemed mad now emerges as a prophetic figure, but notably he is not offering any comforting or simple religious message. Instead, he appears more like a prophet for a postmodern age, asking profound existential questions rather than giving definite answers. He unsettles us rather than offering reassurance. And this is quite different from traditional biblical prophets who delivered clear messages from God, promising salvation and certainty. And here, however, God is absent, and the prophet's alarming message is that we ourselves have murdered God. But what exactly does Nietzsche mean by this provocative statement? So Nietzsche explicitly holds a society, himself included, responsible for killing God. He isn't speaking literally, of course. Instead, he's pointing out that society has dismantled the idea and certainty of an absolute source of meaning, a foundation that once provided truth, morality, and purpose. So the rise of rationalism, science, enlightenment, thought, and the whispered critique of religious values have gradually eroded the foundation supporting the belief in God. And Nietzsche pushes this further by suggesting that even those who proudly call themselves enlightened and mock the very idea of God fail to realize how deeply their values and beliefs are still shaped by the shadow of his dead God. And their supposed liberation isn't complete freedom, but rather a hidden dependence on moral values, scientific reasoning, and rational arguments rooted deeply in the Christian and metaphysical tradition. And this is precisely where Nietzsche's concept of slave morality comes into play, not directly attacking these values themselves, but rather questioning their origins. It's a morality practice without a general belief, which Nietzsche famously described also when he says, God is dead, but given the ways of man, perhaps for millennia to come there will be caves in which his shadow will be shown, and we will still have to subdue his shadow. So what Nietzsche is saying here is that the metaphysical thinking, so our moral guidelines like compassion and humility, are typical values derived from Christianity, and they remain prevalent, not because individuals consciously choose them or genuinely understand their moral depth, but largely out of conformity. And I know, admittedly, Nietzsche's terms like master morality or slave morality may appear definitely provocative or even misleading, and there's so many sentences that need to be criticized. I definitely don't agree with everything he said, but what he's pointing out in this book, the Joyous Signs, is that we have to question the origins of our moralities, that we basically lack this true personal authenticity. And that's what he's criticizing. So Nietzsche isn't just criticizing the traditional religious belief or the moral values itself, but rather that the death of God impacts all forms of metaphysical certainty, even the seemingly neutral rational foundations of modern science. And people often fail to recognize how dependent they still are on these fragile, outdated structures. And to help us grab these enormity of these laws, Nietzsche uses these vivid, these striking metaphors. So he was saying drinking the sea dry, or wiping away the wires with a sponge, unchaining the earth from the sun. So that's a dramatic images illustrating how profoundly and also terrifying this shift truly is. Like, obviously, no one can literally drain the ocean or erase the horizon, but these metaphors powerfully illustrate the massive implications of abandoning our central spiritual and also philosophical reference points. So Nietzsche clearly captures this unsettling experience of losing one's bearings when these old certainties collapse. And it's not just an astronomical metaphor, but a deeply spiritual crisis. So humanity has lost its center and its foundation built up over centuries. And that's also what he basically meant when he was writing, where are we heading? Away from all suns? Are we not constantly falling backward, sideward, forward, in all directions? So he asked, where are we moving? When there's basically no up and down. He emphasizes that there's no longer a clear base, a clear foundation. We stumble blindly, disorientated, and confused, tumbling through chaotic nothingness. And this is the essence of nihilism, not a judgment or moral condemnation, but simply a description of a reality where no ultimate moral or metaphysical anchor exists anymore. And Nietzsche carefully clarifies that he is not advocating nihilism deliberately. He isn't urging us to reject all values intentionally. Instead, he argues that we are already trapped within this state of profound confusion and uncertainty. We have lost all fixed points of reference, drifting in a spiritual vacuum that is not chosen but imposed externally. And what Nietzsche describes as that's basically what Nietzsche described as passive nihilism. So basically an initial state marked by emptiness and also lack of direction. Science is also a belief. Another important point Nietzsche highlights is the role that science plays in modern society. So actually I first thought when I read the book that the book title, so Choice the Joyous Science is actually meant ironically, but it's not. He is not critical of science itself, but rather challenges the widespread illusion that science is entirely neutral, objective, and purely methodological. So Nietzsche argues instead that science is fundamentally driven by a will to truth, which itself is a kind of instinct or an expression of life. So something that can never be ultimately and fully justified. Because modern science, while claiming to be free from biases and presuppositions, actually contributes significantly to dismantling traditional certainties without providing any stable new foundation to replace them. freedom without ground. And in the next part of the aphorism, the madman pushes his desperate reflection on the consequences of God's death even further. And Nietzsche has him ask, how shall we, the most murderers of all murderers, even console ourselves? The holiest and mightiest thing that the world has ever known has bled to death under our own knives. Who will wash this blood clean from our hands? With what water might we be purified? What lustrations, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is it not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we not become gods ourselves, if only to appear worthy of it? There has never been a greater deed, and because of it, whoever is born after us belongs to a higher history than all history hitherto. And here Nietzsche paints a very dark and traumatic image, because the madman, desperately seeking orientation, now wonders how it's even possible to continue it all after such a monstrous act, because Nietzsche already consciously hints here that we might need to invent new rituals and new forms of coexistence, so one's no longer grounded in religion. And he provocatively raises the question of whether it's even possible to successfully form and maintain a community without such shared religiously rooted rituals. And exactly at this point, Nietzsche touches on the attitude that later becomes the characteristic of the postmodern philosophy, namely the realization of literally hanging in the air, this state of being on the way, suspending in nothingness. And Nietzsche's actual message is not at all a radical amoralism like what many people think, or abandoning all values. Rather, he's challenging us to consciously acknowledge how deeply we are still trapped in old patterns of thoughts and moral conceptions, so that we kind of overcome this. And thus Nietzsche describes a dual dynamic here. On the one side, we experience the loss of old certainties and feel the tragedy and anxiety of being overwhelmed, forced to create our own orientation. But on the other side, this loss also opens up a possibility. We are now free to be creative ourselves and autonomously decide what values we want to stand for. And this is also what Nietzsche called active nihilism, when we create these values. Too early for the truth. And in the final part of this aphorism, Nietzsche describes how the madman, after his stirring speech, suddenly falls silent, looking helplessly into the faces of his contemporaries. And it goes on like this. Here, the madman fell silent and looked again at his listeners. They too were silent and stared at him, baffled. At last he threw his lantern on the ground, so that it broke into pieces and went out. I have come too early, he then said. This is not yet the right time. This tremendous event is still on its way and headed towards them. Words of it has not yet reached men's ears. Even after they are over and done with, thunder and lightning take time, and the light of the stars take time, and deeds too take time, before they can be seen and heard. This deed is further away from them than the farthest star, and yet they have done it themselves. So the madman, who until now appeared merely as someone insane, finally reveals himself clearly as the bearer of profound insight. Realizing this, his listeners do not understand him at all. He throws his lantern on the ground, causing it to break and extinguish. But why does he do this? So in this moment, the madman recognizes that he is far ahead of his time. He explicitly says, I have come too early. The others, the masses who communicate and act publicly, are not yet ready or even capable of grasping the magnitude of the event that has taken place and the actual situation they are in. And this is exactly what Hannah Arendt also meant by thinking without banisters. Those who accept the experience of the new the open, the uncertain, must consciously decide how they practically and also theoretically want or need to deal with this groundlessness. This is also exactly the challenge Nietzsche presents to us. Human beings are only slowly coming to grasp the real situation in which they find themselves. Indeed, it took almost a century and a half for people to gradually understand the profound implications of losing absolute certainties. And even today, new groups and there's so many movements continue to emerge, believing once again that they have finally found solid ground under their feet, promising absolute certainties and new freedoms. For instance, there's this belief that technological or economic growth alone can solve all societal problems. This belief also underpins various ideologies that claim universal truth based on theories of their thinkers. And that was Nietzsche when he said, God is dead, and also the choice signs. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time here at the Literature Café.